Imagine if bonuses disappeared tomorrow. How would you keep your team motivated? Now, I never actually received bonuses in my employment, but the point is, we think that money is the ultimate driver for people quite often. But what if it's not? What if the real secrets to motivation lie elsewhere beyond the paycheck? Andrew, research shows that money isn't enough. In your experience, why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a common misconception. I did wonder, was it a sore point they didn't pay bonuses? Were you
Nah,
jealous of
it's
organisations
public
that?
sector.
Yeah, I worked.
Had a
I
good
worked.
pension.
Oh yeah, great pensions. That's what they always say, isn't it? Low
Yeah,
salary but great pension.
yeah.
Um, my brother-in-law years ago, he was in sales, and he would get huge bonuses, and they would like go away on holidays, and they'd buy loads of stuff with their bonus. He used to make a lot of money on bonuses. So yeah, bonuses is one of those things that people use as a way to motivate people, and it's a common misconception. So I'll work with clients, and the manager will often say, these people are only coming to work for the money. They're only here for the money. And the way to motivate them, to make them work harder, to make them work longer hours or work over the weekend is to pay them. Now, let's be realistic. Pay is really important. It's really part of that broader mix of having an effective organization. So we're not saying, certainly in this episode, that pay and salary aren't important. Of course they are. Of course they are. People go to work to earn a living. However, and this is what I think you touched upon, the research suggests over and over and over again, pay is only a tiny part of the motivation mix for your employees. And if you want to be an effective manager, if you want to be an effective leader, there are various levers of motivation that you can pull on. Pay is one of them, but there are lots of other levers, motivation levers that you can use to encourage people to bring their, if you like, best to work. And what we're talking about here is that pay is an external motivator. So I'm coming to work to get money and be paid a bonus for achieving a certain goal. That's fine, but that's what we call external motivators, or motivators that aren't really within me. What you want to tap into, and this is again the psychology of it, is what's known as intrinsic motivators, intrinsic motivation, what comes from within the person. And what the evidence from psychology suggests, that is the majority of our motivation. We're motivated from within more than we're motivated from without. So we're going to talk through lots of different ideas and techniques that you can use as a manager. And again, I want to stress, in addition to salary. And we should start off with, if you're not paying people enough, you're not paying them the national living wage or the national minimum wage at least, or you're paying way below the market rate, they're going to be demotivated. And they're going to be demotivated because they can't pay the credit card, they can't have a decent life, they can't go on holiday. So let's just sort of put that to one side. So we're assuming that you are paying your staff the reasonable amount that they should expect. So if you look at things like, in terms of motivation, recognition. So if your employees, and Gallup have done some research on this, if your employees feel recognized, they feel seen, as in you're recognizing their contribution, the Gallup organization have found that engagement doubles. People feel so much more engaged with their job if they feel seen. Unfortunately, the same research says that something like 60%, and I think it's actually worse than this, of employees do not feel motivated at work. They don't feel engaged at work, and they don't go the extra mile. So this area of motivation and motivation science is really, really crucial for you to have an effective organization and achieve your goals. So handing it back to you, Scott, then from a sort of productivity perspective, what happens to productivity when managers only rely on money then, you think? If they only rely on that sort of extrinsic reward system?
The question I would ask is, would you rather be paid a ton of money to do a job you hate, or a good enough amount of money to do a job that you love?
Yes.
And actually, as you're saying, it's tied into those motivation factors as well. If and we touched on this, I think it's quite a broad spectrum of things that can affect it. So, is your leader good? Are you coached? As in our previous episode, are you clear your direction of travel? You know, have you been given a strategic direction? Do you know what the goals are for you as an individual in your team? Are you, as you said, recognized for your work? Are you rewarded by, not necessarily financially, but recognition for actually you went the extra mile there, or the work you did had a massive achievement in terms of improving customer satisfaction? All of those things will motivate people internally. And actually, if they're not seeing that and not getting that, then their productivity and their engagement is going to drop.
Yes.
And no amount of money thrown at them will fix that. As you said, I forget what the amount is. In my head, it's around 70,000 a year, and beyond that, the extra money doesn't really make a difference to people's lives. You have to enjoy your job. The money will only go so far.
Do you know there's studies about lottery winners? So people imagine
I've
that once
heard
they've
some of it.
Yeah, so people imagine that if they win the lottery and their money problems are all gone, they'll be happy. And what the evidence suggests is that people go back to their sort of baseline happiness. So they might, earning an average salary, and I'd like to try this. I'd love to have this experience, but they then win £1 million on the lottery or something. And then the first year or so, they just, as you can imagine, they're so happy. They can leave work, they can start traveling, they can get the yacht, whatever it is. Within about a year, they're back to their average level of happiness. So yeah, money is important to people, but only to a point.
Yeah, and it's linked into that sense of purpose, isn't it, that we've touched on before. So as we said, people tie their job largely into their sense of purpose.
Yes.
We said before, what do you do? Well, you answer with your job first. So if you have a job that is unsatisfying, that doesn't give you a direction, and those millionaires who quit their jobs, well, I've got loads of money, but I've kind of got no sense of purpose anymore, because there's only so many holidays you can have. And you will start to feel unworthy, like, well, what's my purpose in this world?
Well, it's interesting to say that, because of course there's people who get made redundant, and we've talked about career threat of being made redundant and the risk of your career ending. But people who are redundant, they suffer depression because they've lost that sense of purpose. Clearly, there's a money element to that as well, unless they've been given a lot of redundancy money. And then the other one is people who retire, and like people, I can't wait to retire. Retirement's actually quite bad for you, because certainly for men particularly, they often die within a couple of years of retirement.
Yeah,
because they lose that sense of purpose. And hopefully you've got a good income, you've got a good pension or pensions, so you hopefully got enough money when you retire. But people do lose that sense of purpose. So again, it goes back to this idea that money isn't everything. It's about that sense of purpose. Who am I? What value do I bring to the world, isn't it?
Yeah. So as you said, I think it's important for organizations and leaders within those to give employees that recognition, assuming the employees are in the right job that they enjoy, and that leaders are good, and they're doing all the stuff that we've talked about in other episodes.
Yes.
Actually, make sure that you do call it out. Give the employees recognition that you are noticing what they're doing. Be very specific with praise that you give. Make that praise not necessarily one-to-one. Do it in front of other team members on team calls and say, I want to, call out 3 of you today have done a really good job on this, because good and fair recognition, and fair is important because you don't want to have favorites, and you want to make sure that everybody feels they're recognized at some point in time, and they're always just praising everybody else, but my work isn't recognized, so it can backfire. But fair recognition can make employees more than up to 4 times more likely to be engaged with their work and with the organization. And on a wider level, that boosts the culture. People feel connected to the organization, and all those kind of good things that we've talked about before.
Often managers are telling you what you've done wrong, aren't they? They're often telling you what you've failed.
It's very easy to do that. Yeah.
Or they don't.
Yeah.
Praise is literally lacking in many organizations. It's either you're just doing your job, so I don't need to praise you, or I'm here to catch you out. So I suppose I'd ask any listener is, if you are leading a team, when's the last time you sent and gave some genuine praise? Especially the research suggests if it's unexpected. So I know you're talking about regular praise. If somebody wasn't expecting some praise, that's even more powerful.
One of my bosses, quite some time ago now, but they actually took the time to write a letter. Or it was a typed up letter, but it was on headed paper, and it was signed, and it was sent through the internal post. It just could have sent an email, but they actually took the time to put it in a letter and say, you did a really good job on this project. And that just I've still got that somewhere.
Have you
I had this
really?
little box of like things to keep, like
Mementos.
memories, and
Yeah.
it's just a subtle change for,
Yes.
could have just sent me an email, great job, but actually just taking the time to do that. Those kind of things go a long way,
You
and I
made the
still
effort.
obviously remember that to this day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Had an impact on you, clearly.
So Andrew, how do you think recognition works from a psychological angle?
Well, when we get recognized and we feel seen, we feel as though we belong, we feel as though we're valued. And you think from our sort of ancestral past, our evolutionary past, the worst thing for a human being is to be ostracized. If you think about our hunter gatherer past, our ancestors, you didn't survive if you weren't part of a group. And if you were excluded from the group, that was death, essentially. And that, in fact, we talk about being ostracized. We talk about, we used to say the expression sent to Coventry. I don't know if anybody remembers that phrase. It's this idea of being pushed outside of the group. So recognition, where people say, I see you, I value you, drives that sense of self-worth, if you like. Now, you've got to be careful here because you can develop your own personal self-worth. But all of us as human beings, we're balancing that individuality about me as an individual and where I sit in the group. Do I belong here? Am I valued here? Am I appreciated here? So recognition from your manager, especially, who is this really important person obviously in your job, if he or she gives you some recognition and it feels genuine and it feels authentic and it's out of the blue, they write you a letter on letterheaded note paper. I mean, wow, that feels good. And it feels good because it releases hormones within us. You get like a dopamine hit, you get an oxytocin, release of oxytocin. And people have heard of dopamine very often these days, although people misunderstand what dopamine actually is. But oxytocin is the sort of love hormone. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy, that sort of feeling between partners and children, parents and children. So we get a release of dopamine, we get a release of oxytocin. It feels good. And oxytocin, especially, has been seen to be really important for building trust. Now, my favorite phrase on this podcast, you know what I'm going to say, is psychological safety. So if people feel as though you're recognizing them, you're valuing them, they start to trust you and they start to trust people that they work with as well. So it just improves everything. It really does. I think the other thing to point out in terms of motivation and not just using money is if people are using their strengths. So what can happen is if somebody's in a job, and you mentioned this before, if they're in the right job for them, they're doing the right type of work for them. So one person's very creative and they should be working on creative projects, and somebody's very sort of analytical, likes numbers, likes working in Excel spreadsheets. If they're using their strengths, that also boosts their motivation and their engagement. Of course, people can be in the wrong job. So as a manager, as a leader, you also want to try and develop their core strengths. And that's another way to motivate people without using money. And I've seen this, I've seen particular projects where we've looked at people's skill sets, and clearly people are doing the wrong type of work. They are working in spreadsheets when they should be working on branding designs and vice versa. So understanding the people that are around you, what motivates them, and trying to give them some sort of control, trying to increase autonomy. And something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast is within the constraints of the job, allowing people to make choices. The order, and I could ask you some tips on this, but the order of tasks they work in, you're very keen on prioritization, of course, of tasks, what's the most important, but maybe they get to choose that task priority. Making sure that they're working on projects which just stretch them a little. You don't overwhelm people with something that they don't feel comfortable with. You don't overwhelm them with completely new projects without some sort of education and learning, but giving them something that they feel as though they're developing and they're growing and they're learning. That also can motivate people. If all they ever do is the same old, what they were doing today looks like what they were doing yesterday. And if they went back a year in time, it would look exactly like they were doing something a year ago. They're going to get bored. So always trying to think, how can you get people's interest and, novelty is really important to people. And finally, before I sort of hand back to you, Scott, as well, I think that when you look at the statistics, I think there's some shocking statistic I read that 86% of people would switch jobs, not just for the money, but to grow as a person. And that was from People Insight. And that is mind-blowing. A lot of people would say, okay, all things being equal, if maybe I got the same salary, ideally more, maybe even less, I would actually change jobs in order to grow as a person. And when you hear that as a manager or as a leader, that should destroy your idea that people are only here for the money. They're also here for the growth. They're also here for the self-development, don't you think?
I've seen that firsthand where previously I led development teams and we were in public sector at the time, and they could have very easily gone and significantly improved their salary going to different companies. And a couple of them did leave actually. They were tempted to do that. And both of them asked for their old job back within a week.
Oh, really?
Because the way that we worked and that autonomy that they had was around, and the best way I could sum it up is I would present the problem to them, the customer problem, the customer need, and then over to you, how you achieve that, how you solve that. And I would say, you're smarter than me. You know how to do this. I don't. I'll give you the problem. I'll give you the environment for success, that you have the power to do it the way you think best. And for a number of them, that was very unusual because they were used to, normally I'm just told how to do it. But the fact that they could use their brains, they could problem solve, and we encourage the team members to actually work together in a big team, solving the problems. Literally around one big screen, I'd have 5 people. How do we solve this? What's the best way to do this? What's your experience? What's yours? And I wouldn't be involved in that. I would just take a step back, and they would call me if they needed me for some guidance on the problem. But the how was their challenge and their reward, actually. And that's incredibly motivating, as we've been saying. And I found that firsthand. So my job was to frame the outcome that we wanted to achieve, not the steps to get there. That was their job. And there are tools to visualize that and to track that. I feel like I should be getting some commission for plugging Trello. I seem to mention it on most episodes. But task boards, checking in, be that leader that gives them the problem but lets them solve it. And I've seen that time and time again be so effective for motivating a team and getting results. And that can spread. As I said, I had a very happy team. We had some challenges. It was certainly for them was not about the pay. As I said, they could have got paid a lot more elsewhere, but they stuck around. And the work we were doing was incredibly rewarding. Being public sector, we were solving problems for people in time of need. So I'm a big advocate for this approach. It's not just about money, and it ties in a lot to what we talked about in the previous episode, which is taking more of that coaching style, and that leadership approach.
Yeah, completely. And as I say, I think I'd sort of wrap it up by saying that as a manager and a leader, these are not robots. These are not your minions. They're human beings. They have motivations that are varied and mixed. Each person will be different. You need to understand each person individually, but it isn't just about the money. And to bookend what we said, of course, people come to work to earn a living. Of course they do. And as long as they're getting what they need to have a reasonable life, and each person's perspective on that is different. What I would think is a good salary, you might not think, and vice versa. But once people have achieved that sort of what they think is reasonable, then they're looking for growth, they're looking for autonomy, they're looking for mastery, they're looking for a sense of purpose. And if you as a manager understand that, you'll get much more out of the people around you. They will be happier, and so will you. You'll be less stressed, and you'll be more successful as a leader as well. So it makes a huge amount of sense to understand motivation theory and treat people with that sort of respect that you would want yourself. Thank you for listening to the Work Unravelled podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next one.
If you'd like Andrew or me to help you or your business, whether it is for team productivity, leadership coaching, or communication skills, our website addresses are in the show notes. Thanks, and until the next time.